She hadn't seen him in over a decade. But when the wind shifted across the broken silence of the savannah, she turned her head slow and deliberate, as if pulled by something older than instinct, the blood of her calf soaking into the dirt beneath her massive frame, her breath shallow, her eyes wide, not with fear, but with a memory she could not name. Because somewhere in the darkness, something moved, not with threat, but with familiarity. Something her body recognized before her mind could catch up. A presence carved into her bones from another life. The life before the silence, before the separation, before the wild took her back and made her forget everything, except the feeling of his hand and the way he once said her name. Not out of command, but out of love. And now as footsteps echoed, faint across the earth, she did not run. She did not fight. She only waited, trembling with the weight of all the years that had tried, but failed to erase him. The days had fallen into a rhythm, now soft and muted. Like footsteps on old earth, the man rose with the sun. Not because he needed to, but because his body still remembered the early calls of the wild. Back when dawn meant life, and a soft grunt meant she was near. He brewed his tea in silence. Always two cups, though. One remained untouched out of habit or hope. He wasn't sure anymore, and as he walked the edge of the empty paddock, eyes scanning instinctively for a shape that hadn't been there in years, he told himself he was only checking the fences, but his hands would brush the post where she used to lean into him, heavy and unafraid. And at night, when the wind carried dust through the screens, he sometimes heard her breath, not loud, not real but full and low like memory. And though the world saw a man, at peace, he moved through life with the kind of ache that hides behind routine, the kind that settles not in the bones, but in the space between heartbeats where no one can see it but him. The day she was taken felt wrong even before the gates opened, the air too still, the sky too wide, and when they led her toward the truck she resisted, not with rage but with confusion, her eyes searching for the one face she knew, the one voice that had always meant calm. But he stood back silent, his hands clenched, not in control, but in helplessness. And when she was loaded and the door shut between them, he stepped forward, too late, too soft. And she turned just once, meeting his gaze with something like a question, like why? And then she was gone, swallowed by dust and silence. And in the wild she did not forget. She learned to move like the others learned to survive, to guard her body and hide her heart. But the nights were long and full of spaces where he used to be. And though she never made a sound, she waited, every dusk, for something to return that never came. And the man too changed. He poured himself into other lives, other rescues, but his hands were always looking for a weight that wasn't there. And every time he saw the wide grey back of a rhino turn away, into the bush, he felt the echo of that last glance, the one that broke him quietly. And in the long years that followed, neither of them truly healed. They simply learned to live inside the quiet where her name was never spoken, and his face only visited. In dreams, let me pause for just a moment and ask you this: where are you listening from? Have you ever had someone, maybe a person, maybe even an animal, remember you after years apart? That quiet recognition that says you were never really forgotten. If stories like this speak to something in you, hit subscribe. There's so much more ahead that just might touch your heart. It started with a photo, blurry raw, taken at dusk, a rhino standing over her calf, unmoving, unyielding eyes, fixed on something far beyond the lens. And the moment he saw it, something struck through him like a blade. Not of pain, but of knowing the stance, the tilt of the head, the tension in her shoulders. It wasn't just any rhino, it couldn't be. And then came the voice over the radio, rough, uncertain. We've never seen anything like this. She won't eat, won't rest, just stands there bleeding. We think the calf's not going to make it, and maybe she knows. Maybe she's waiting for something we can't give. And the man sat in silence, gripping the edge of the counter too hard. Knuckles' white breath shallow because something inside him broke and spilled at once. All the years he'd buried, all the what-ifs, he'd trained himself to ignore the dreams he dismissed as guilt and nothing more. But now it wasn't a dream. It was a call, and with it came a storm of questions. What if it's not her? What if she doesn't? Remember, what if she's changed too much or worse? What if he had? But the greater fear lay beneath. What if she did remember? And what if she had been waiting all this time? And he had stayed away? And so despite the tremor in his hands, he packed lightly, moved quickly, left a note with no explanation, because how do you explain the pull of something wordless, something wild, something once lost, but never unloved? And as the road opened before him, long and red and endless, he felt the ache of all those years collapse into motion. No certainty, no promise, only the smallest whisper of hope and the impossible question echoing in his chest. Could she still know him? The sun was barely a thought on the horizon. When he stepped from the truck, the air cool, with that hushed weight only found before the world fully wakes. He walked slowly, boots crunching over dry grass. Each step careful, deliberate, not out of fear, but reverence. And there she was, her body still as stone, her ears twitching once toward the sound, but otherwise unmoved. She didn't look at him. At first, her gaze locked on the calf beside her, its breathing faint, uneven, the dust around it stained dark and silent. Then, as if something brushed the edge of her awareness, she turned just her head, nostrils widening, scenting the air. Her eyes found him, and in that instant time folded, her muscles tensed. Not to flee, but to understand her stare, hard, unblinking, and his heart slammed so loud, he wondered if she could hear it. He stopped just out of reach, not daring to speak yet. And in the quiet that hung between them, the wind shifted slightly, bringing with it the scent of sweat, old leather and earth, all of it him. And that's when it happened. Her ears tipped forward ever so slightly, her shoulders softened not in submission, but in something older than fear. She took a step, not toward him, not away, just a shift as if making space, and he exhaled finally, barely realizing he'd been holding his breath. He said her name, not loud, not commanding, just a whisper carried across years and wind and bone, and she didn't answer. Not in sound, but in stillness, the kind that comes only when the soul remembers. And as he moved closer, slowly, steadily, her eyes never left his, and when he knelt beside the calf, her head lowered just slightly, as if to say yes, this one I remember. And the silence between them was no longer empty. It was full of everything they had once shared, and everything they had lost, and now somehow found again. The days passed slow and golden, the kind of days that don't ask for anything loud, just presence. He would sit nearby, not too close, never intruding, but always there. And she would glance at him from time to time, not out of suspicion, but recognition. The calf grew stronger, its breath deeper, its steps steadier, and once as it tried to stand and stumbled, the man reached out without thinking, his hand brushing its side, and the mother did not flinch, did not move. She only watched calm, like she remembered this, like she had seen this hand. Before once, when she too was unsteady and afraid, he began humming without realizing it, a broken tune, half forgotten, and her ears flicked the same way they used to when she was young, and he sang at dusk. And as days warmed and wounds faded, she began to meet him halfway, her body no longer guarding but choosing to be near. And one morning she let her shoulder rest against his back just lightly, just enough. And he closed his eyes because something in him that had been quiet for years no longer hurt it, didn't need words, didn't need apology. What they had lost had not been taken, only buried. And now it breathed again. Not loudly, not in stories or photos, but in small things, a glance, a gesture, a shared silence. The world saw a miracle, a headline, a moment, gone viral, but the truth lived in the dust. In the way she stood beside him without fear, in the way he smiled, not with his mouth, but with the weight that had lifted from his chest. And what they had was not magic. It was memory. It was survival. It was love that never stopped waiting. Some bonds are not measured in time or distance or even memory, but in the quiet way two lives find each other again, when the world has long stopped expecting it. She did not need to remember his name to know him, and he did not need to speak to feel whole in her presence. What they had once shared had not vanished, only gone silent, waiting beneath the noise of life for the one moment when it would matter most. And when that moment came, it did not arrive with noise or drama, but with stillness and breath and a glance across wounded ground. And now they do not speak, they simply stay near. And in that nearness is everything: love, trust, forgiveness, survival, and the unspoken truth that the heart remembers even when the world forgets.